But,
There you
but
go.
welcome everybody to the February meeting of the Deschutes Public Library District Board. It's good to see you all. And welcome to members of the staff. And it doesn't look like we have any members of the public present that I can see. But have people had a chance to review the minutes?
Yes.
Any additions or corrections?
I would, everybody else? Okay. I was gonna say, we did have a definition of diversity and inclusion that Todd gave. It was different from, I guess, what textbook would say. I thought it'd be good to have that in here.
I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you, Ray. Could you repeat?
Hold on. Yeah, I'm saying we had a discussion on diversity, equity, inclusion. And Todd's definition was a little bit different than what I was thinking of in what's textbook. And I thought we might want to include that in the minutes. So it really has to do with, well, whatever Todd wanted to say, because it's a pretty long discussion. Put the salient points in, Todd.
Well, I guess I would say we do, people can go on and watch the recording if they wanted to see that, but
I think we thought it'd be easier to have it in writing here.
yeah, I hate to have my explanation in writing because I don't think it's the best explanation of equity, diversity, and inclusion, but.
Oh, I thought it was excellent.
No.
I mean, really
Yeah, I think that we kind of decided to let the online record speak for itself, and to mainly focus the minutes, not so much on the discussion, but on the actions taken.
I was thinking this is defining the terms. Diversity, equity, inclusion.
I think most people have a general understanding of what's involved.
Well,
I mean, it's been written about extensively and discussed extensively publicly, so I don't think many people would have very many questions about it.
Well,
How do the rest of you feel?
I see, here it is, the coaching. I didn't know where it was, where we had discussed it. So perhaps Todd could just tell us what it was, if you know, or.
I couldn't say it again, but what I want to say is, in general, the first point, just the way we've been crafting the minutes is on the direction of the board, where I'm keeping it kind of minimal, where people can go in further. So that would be one point. And we can do whatever you want with that. I'm not sure that's the best point to highlight for that. But mainly it's more of my concern about whatever I said, because I'm not sure how accurate it was. So.
well, I thought what you said was really quite, for me, it was very interesting. It really pertains to the library and how we operate. Because when I think of diversity, equity, inclusion, I think most people do. They think of racial equity, all the rest of the obvious things that you can see, right? Economic equity, diversity, and you really came through and said it's really how we are treating, how individuals in the staff treat each other and the public, and looking at our own, being aware of our own personal, unconscious biases, and we're training for that so that we are more aware of ourselves, both in relationship to the library staff and to patrons. I thought that was a very nice definition, unique.
Well, do people feel like the minutes, would anyone like to make a motion to amend the minutes?
Well, I'll make a motion to amend that. The minutes to include definitions for diversity, equity, inclusion, brief description, definition. Just to clarify.
What do we want to then to say,
Well, you
Yes.
just, what I
I
said,
need to know that before I vote.
okay. And then to say, Todd defined diversity, equity, and inclusion to mean a more self-awareness of our unconscious biases. And to work on those so that we have a better way of interacting with staff. Staff has a better way of interacting with each other and with the public. So we're not talking about racial.
Isn't that what the coaching session is about?
Yeah, this defines what the outcome is supposed to be. Otherwise, it's just a cooking session. We don't know what.
Well, wouldn't the Michael Gregor, when they put together this course or whatever it is, you would say, this is what we're looking for, here is where we're going. I would think that,
Don't put in there. But
yeah.
I'm saying here, well, we're giving the amount,
Yeah.
giving out a contract, but for what goal? It's kind of open. You can coach on anything you want here.
Oh, no, it says equity, diversity, inclusion, leadership.
Right, you want to have repeat defined, but I'm saying, should be defined as Todd defined it, because I thought that was excellent.
I
Well,
guess-
we have a motion on the floor. Would anyone like to second the motion?
I guess I have a question. I'm sorry to do this in the middle. Do you, when you, as a staff, have minutes or documentation of what is going to be included in the coaching sessions? Is there anything written that the library has that includes
Yeah,
what the coaching section?
we have this full proposal, which would be more relevant than what I said.
Because that would address directly what's going to be covered in the coaching sessions, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
For me, I guess if we put in a definition, kind of putting the cart before the horse. This is a training for the staff. And I'm assuming through that training, the staff themselves will come up with a definition that works for them. That's how I want it to work. I don't think we should impose a definition. I agree.
Well, they would come out with methods that would work for themselves. But if you don't define what we're talking about, then how's the staffing?
Maybe I said for Robert's Rules of Order is just, do we have a second on this
Right,
before we go into discussion?
right. Well, hearing no second, the motion dies. And I would entertain a motion regarding approval of the meeting minutes.
I move to approve the January 12th, 2022 minutes as written.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, one opposed. Motion passes. Okay. We now have the board work session minutes from our board work session. On January 28th, I would entertain a motion to approve those. Or,
Then to approve the January 28th, 2022 board work session meeting summary as written.
do I hear a second?
A second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. Okay, we're in the public comment section of the meeting. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the board on any topic? Hearing no requests, we'll close the public comment section. And now we have our bond update from Greg.
Am I okay to take off my mask? Make it a little easier for you to hear me. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'd say general overview of things are progressing well throughout the past month and into this month. Everything's moving along well. Busy. We've got a lot of activity going on, and the DPL staff will attain to that. There's a lot happening because a lot of the projects are now coming out of the ground, design, being Central and Redmond and the Pine and Sisters are all actively in the design phases. So, but the overall process, I think, is working well. The communication is working well. And so continue to be satisfied and happy with how that's going. Always looking at that, want to make sure our teamwork and approach from that standpoint is very healthy. On project controls on the schedule throughout January, there wasn't a lot of changes to the schedule. Everything's tracking to that schedule throughout the project. We are going through an update this month here in February, and so as we brought on our CMGC, and particularly with Central and Redmond, Kirby, Nagelhout, and so they produced their first draft construction schedule for us. And so we started our review of that to look at how they want to build the buildings and how that looks in our master development schedule. Our construction line item is, I think, 2 or 3 activities, right? It's like start here, finish here. And now they're starting to define for us of how they're going to go about that. And we look at that. We talked to Miller Ball, our design team, along with Steel, to talk about, okay, how's that blend with our plan for development of plans, securing of permits, and phasing of work. And so we're going through that process this month and plan to do an update to our development schedule. I don't expect any major changes on end dates and stuff like that, but really putting more definition into how do we achieve our established durations, goals, and expectations for the project. So we're adding a lot of detail. Same as with SunWest Builders. We brought them on board in January. They engaged right away with us on developing conceptual cost estimates. And with their conceptual cost estimates, they also looked at schedule and for each of the branches and of what they would see in a schedule and how does that tie to our master development schedule. So we're taking a look at all of those elements, every property, to really kind of have to always be looking at each one, even though some of them, downtown Bend doesn't happen for a number of years, but we're actually doing a lot of active planning on that. How does it sequence with the other work and how will it follow in step with Central and the other projects? So the summary schedule didn't change, as far as starts and stop dates. I think I'll probably see a little bit of adjustment on some of these to align with our schedule next month as we produce our updated schedule. But I think overall, very happy with how our schedule is being maintained. And the team's engagement on that. Miller Hall as our lead designer. We talk about schedule every week with them. They keep their own internal schedule, every meeting, every deadline they have, and how they're achieving our schedule dates. So, I think that's a good process that's going on to see our consultants that actively paying attention to the schedule. To me, schedule is always highly important because you miss on schedule, you cost money, right? Expectations of yourselves, DPL, and the community. And so it is something that I monitor on a regular basis. From a budgeting standpoint, there was very minor adjustments in the budget this month. They were just some adjustments for services for survey work, but no overall changes in the project budget in January. We're going through right now, so as in January, Kirby and JLD, our cost estimator, completed schematic level budgets, cost estimates for Central and Redmond. And then Sun West Builders and JLD completed conceptual budgets for all of the branches, the 4 branches and downtown. And so those were all developed throughout January by the teams. We started our review process right at the end of January, and that's continuing on into this month. And so one of the things is we get into schematic design, which you saw, this past week on, or we could go to 28. There's a lot more detail, a lot more information. Well, that relates into a much more defined and information on a budget standpoint, especially for Central and Redmond. And so we had really good budgets prepared by both JLD and Kirby that we were able to go through, and they've done some reconciliations that we're now going through. It helps to define, is our budget accurate? Do we have money set aside that's appropriate in the right amounts? What are starting to look at? What are our options to add scope or delete scope, adjust scope? And that's just part of the normal process that you go through, especially in the schematic and design development phases, is to really refine what we're spending our money on and making sure that we're in alignment before we go into construction documents. And so that process is proceeding. We talk about this on a weekly basis for ourselves. Throughout the month of February, we're going through another full budget analysis. Miller Hall produced a FF&E budget, so that's all the furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And that comprises all of those furniture systems, shelving systems, the automatic material handling system, the AMH, AV and IT components, a whole variety. So we've been going through that budget review as well. And again, they update it each time we go through a major design phase. So at the end of schematic, they have to update their budget for us. That way we can look at it, make sure the budget is in alignment with what's on the plans in design so that they're aligned, and what's their cost estimate compared to the budget we're carrying for. Is it still in alignment? Where do we need to make adjustments if necessary? So that budget has been looked at. Again, it started in January and is continuing here into February. So far, there's nothing that is, there's going to be movements like you saw coming out of the December update where we adjusted money between projects. And at that time, we allocated the contingency reserves to each of the projects. And so you'll see some adjustments between projects or from contingency to a line item, or if there's unused from a line item back into contingency. So those are the things that we'll do throughout this month. That'll be presented to DPL later this month, and then will be included in the board update so that you can see that and we can talk about that. I'm not seeing anything so far that is alarming, that is unmanageable. What I do see is consistent with my experience in this, of where we're at in the design phase. So just makes me feel comfortable that, hey, we can manage to the extent that we need to any issues. Some of the projects are spot on, some are a little under, some are a little over, but in a very normal course of where we would expect them to be at this point. So from a budget standpoint, that's kind of where most of that sits. On the summary of costs, I included the updated budget. I have not adjusted the format being specific to the branches, where I'm going to break out the construction costs for each of those, the 4 branches. And I want to do that with my budget update coming up here, so that as I go through these cost estimates that we currently have, so that I show you that information. So you'll see that in next month's report. Otherwise, the format didn't change. The information, for the most part, budget-wise hasn't changed. Spent to date and committed to date were adjusted based on the contracts we executed in January for SunWest, for the commissioning agent, and then just the processing of monthly payments were really the changes that happened mostly under spent to date, committed to date. Our sources of funds, which is the second page of the budget, hasn't changed. That was consistent with what we saw before, so no adjustments there. Flip back there. So that's really kind of it on summary costs. The procurement and contracts, really no activity outside of what we already approved in January at the January board meeting of issuing those 2 contracts. We'll have some coming up, but not a lot. We got a lot of what we needed to do done on engagement of consultants and contractors. Our purchasing agent who will work with us on furniture and fixtures and all of that will be probably our next primary consultant to bring on board. And I would see that happening over the next 2 to 3 months. So as we are getting through our DD phase here, we want to have them on board to help think about the process of actually going out and getting final proposals and managing the purchasing process. Our last CMGC, which will be for work package 3, which is downtown Bend, will happen at the end of the year. So it'll be kind of quiet on that front for the next few months. Insurance, and in your packet was a separate summary for the DSIP. I know I'm going to cover that kind of separately, but we've gone through that process of securing that and getting that. So that's being presented today for approval to move forward with that. And so I'll touch base on that separately. The entitlement process with Central, as you recall, our text amendment was deemed complete in January by the city. We started a bi-weekly meeting process with the city and had 2 meetings with them already, and very productive, talking about all the next detailed steps. One of the things in our schedule update is where we had a single activity saying, city approvals for our text amendment and for our site plan and for annexation. We worked with the city to say, okay, here are the specific steps. We're going to go to Planning Commission February 28th for the text amendment. And then it will go to 2 rounds with the city council. And then there's a period for enactment or where it becomes effective. And so we've been able to start adding detail into our schedule, those specific steps that we have talked to the city about, understood what their timeline was and how we go forward, and any information that they're needing. So far with the text amendment, they have everything they need. It's all prepared. Staff is completing their staff report that will go to Planning Commission. And like I said, that hearing is on the 28th of February. Relative to our site plan and annexation, we have a public hearing for our site plan that comes up here in February. That's on the 16th. And so the team issued out notices to our neighbors. There's a radius and where we send out the notice. And it'll be very much like the public hearing we had in December for the text amendment, where it'll be a Zoom meeting. Everybody will be able to log in, and Miller Hall will do the primary presentation because it's about design this time versus where the text amendment was about a written document. Todd and Mark Mixes from our office will have, components of our presentation, but Miller Hall will really lead the presentation in presenting our design to the members there to come in and go through that. And that's all in advance of us submitting our application for annexation and our site plan approval process, which will take place following that. We start working on our application. It'll go in March. And that is in sequence with what we're doing with our text amendment. And so that's part of what we've been able to work out with the city is the exact steps for all of those components and all the way through. Submittal, review, comments going back and forth between our team and the city's team, and then the actual approval processes that will occur over the coming 6 months and get us to our currently anticipated approvals of text amendment in effective date in June. And then we'll see our annexation and site plan approvals go into July and early August. And following that will actually become our building permit approvals for some of our early permits that will happen in early fall then, right afterwards. So those things, that process is working well. With ODOT, we are engaged with them. They are also joining our meetings with the city because the city wants to be talking to them about how the roundabout's going to go, how Robles going to go, and our interface with them. And so we'll be submitting them more of our plans. They're right in the process of bidding out all of their design build work for all of the work along Highway 20 for all the roundabouts, and then the reconstruction on Highway 97. And so they seem to be tracking good to their schedule where they're going to have their proposals in. They had anticipated making an award by June, which is built into our schedule, and when they will award, and then we'll do our final adjustments with them regarding our amendment and how we're going to link together. They still look to complete the roundabout in 2023, the end of 2023, which is consistent with our schedule and well in advance. You know, we finished Central for opening in August to October timeframe, where we complete the work and then move in, open up there. So the roundabouts looks to be completed, you know, a good 9 to 10 months in advance. So even if they have any issues, they have some time there, you know, relative to our needs. So that still feels really good that that coordination is going on.
When was that roundabout completed?
They're talking the end of 2023, so the fourth quarter. They haven't given a specific schedule because once they hire their design build, they will develop their contract schedules and do that. But they've told us their goal is to get the roundabouts on Highway 20 done first before they attack and do Highway 97. So in their big picture scheme of things, so that's their priorities, which align actually quite well with us. So because they'll be doing the Cooley one as well. So, I think any of our adjacent roads will be in really good shape at opening.
Excuse me, Greg, I just wanted to make a comment. I wanted to remind everybody that we're going to hold our questions to the end of reports as we decided last month. And my apologies because I forgot to say that.
And I'm sorry, I just didn't hear what he said.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm sorry.
On Redmond, you know, the activity in January was the city council approved the transfer of the land to DPL. The quick claim was prepared by the city and is submitted. I know that will be reviewed with you guys today for approval, and then we will process a lot line adjustment to create a single lot line. We're going through, we don't have the same type of land use approvals in Redmond as we do Central because it's an existing property, it's already in the city, and so we have a normal site plan approval and traffic of how our new parking lot is going to function and work and what the basic layout of the project is. So it's a much simpler process to go through. It's still steps that we're going through. So that is moving forward. That's mostly, Miller Hall and the design team preparing that. Our traffic engineer is doing the traffic study that the city will need to say, here's how many stalls and how we're dealing with our parking. So nothing of issue there that it's real concerning. It's just kind of marching its way along. From a design standpoint, as I said, we got through the schematic design process in the month of January for Central and Redmond, the presentation to you all. And I know we'll talk about kind of the sign off of those, but that was, again, a very, positive process, I think, that we went through to really allow DPL to look at the designs presented by Miller Hall, to adjust and massage those designs, to gather staff input on how the functional space of, the staff areas of how they're going to work and how DPL wants to operate the building, to really lock in, okay, here's our baseline of how we're going to move forward into design elements. And that is moving right along now that we're into February, that they are advancing into the next level of design. On the branches, as I mentioned, Sisters and Lapine, they showed us progress drawings on the schematic designs in January, and here in February, they're actually issuing us the 100% schematic designs for those two libraries. And they'll be coming out, and then we'll start our review process on those as well. Staff, community, yourselves, at some point here to present those two designs. And so they've got a little bit of a stagger, which is good. So from a design standpoint, I think that's really the primary activities there. And I'll talk about the summary I wrote up for that we were asking for your approval on and what that means. So it's really kind of everything on the board report that I had. Maybe if there's questions about it, and then I'll touch base on the two summaries.
Does anybody have any questions? Thank you, Greg.
Cynthia?
I had one question, actually two. The public hearing is on the 16th. You said it's going to be a Zoom meeting?
Yes.
Okay, so will we be able to get that? Okay. And then the second one is, so right now, the Redmond Library is sitting on two pieces of property?
It is.
Yeah.
So when they built the school, it was on two pieces?
Yeah, it was set up so that where the building is a separate lot that is owned by DPL.
Oh,
Where the building is, I should say, not the school, but the
I
building,
didn't
right?
know that.
The parking lot itself is owned by the city, deeded over to DPL for use in eternity, but with conditions. And the city had controls built into that deed. So what we asked them to do was, let's remove those controls, and they agreed they don't need them, and let the district take full ownership in perpetuity. And it's a no cost deal. But yeah, there's a good picture of the two lots.
Yeah,
So that,
this is the city of Redmond, and this is the Deschutes Public Library.
yeah.
And the pocket part was separate somehow.
It's actually part of the city right here.
Yeah, right in the
Yeah.
front.
And with the changes, it'll all just be one single lot that is DPL's property now, which simplifies life. We'll have some easements, normal easements for utility lines that go through, but nothing that's unusual for any piece of property.
Essentially allows us to develop the entire lot.
Yes.
Not having to go through city group, which
Right.
could have done, but it's one step.
Yeah, we would have actually been building the building on 2 different lots, which isn't allowable.
Right.
And we'd have to have rewritten the whole deed anyway, even if they didn't transfer it to us, because the restrictions they put on there wouldn't allow us to do what we wanted to do, and they understood that. Yeah, no, they just said it was something that happened when the land was transferred a long time ago. They didn't know what they would be doing long-term, so they put in these restrictions.
What kind of restrictions do they have?
Just that we couldn't build in the parking lot.
Okay.
We could only use it as a parking
That's
lot
part.
without their approval. And they realize now that they have no intentions of ever asking for the land back. And they don't need to restrict us. And so they said, let's deed it over to the district. So
Mhm.
it was actually a very easy hearing with city council. They're all 100% supportive of it.
Okay, any additional questions?
I had a question on the cost.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if it's been- Summary cost.
Yep.
I noticed that the downtown branch, the salt cost decreased by almost $6,000 compared to last month. And I assume that was because something was not spent.
Yes. Are you talking about the cost spent to date?
Spent today.
There was a correction on a billing that was allocated. And it actually had to do with our cost estimate, where they had billed a certain amount in their very first billing.
Uh-huh.
And it was overbilled on that one and reallocated to another. So we have a kind of a main contract and we allocate costs. And we allocated too much to downtown and then we redid it in January.
So the other question is, where did the 6,000 go to?
It went up into, I want to say,
No,
Red-
I'm trying to find where it went.
it only showed up really noticeably because it was a reduction in downtown,
Right.
but it really was applied more to Redmond, I believe is where it was.
So that was part of the soft cost. increase.
Yeah, it was a committed cost, but in your spent to date, it showed up because of a correction in his invoice.
Yeah. It's just interesting when cost goes down. I go, "Ooh,
Yeah,
hey,
it-
where else can you do this?"
exactly. In that case, it was just a movement between the allocations of his contract between the different packages. 'Cause, JLD works on all of the work packages.
I would say, like, in the future, if that happens, you can say where it went to.
Yeah.
If you didn't go back into the overall contingency.
Yeah.
reserve.
In this case, it stayed within his contract. It just was on the payable side.
Yeah.
We credited one and reassigned it to the other.
Within the same vendor.
He went through on his very first invoice, he was going through a accounting system change. And I say he, that's the owner of JLD. And so they made estimates on their very first billing and then we corrected any of them. And that was a correction that showed up.
Reality.
Yeah, once he got on his new accounting system, because he's hourly, and so his first billing was an estimate of where he thought he would be, and the second billing was a correction based on actual, where we could go in and look at his actual hours and say, okay, you see where you estimated you were going to spend it here, but you really spent it there, and reallocate it. So it didn't change our commitment or his contract, it just allocation.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
And I'm assuming that all of those numbers, Robert looks over everything.
Yep.
Not that I'm
Not
sure,
speaking
but
with you,
it's-
Robert, but I know he does.
Yeah, I was quietly nodding my head when you said yes.
Yes,
FYI.
Yeah.
okay. Any additional questions? Okay,
I think the next one up was the DSIP.
yes,
Here, so the DSIP, again, that's a district-specific insurance program. And this has to do with general liability policies. And kind of to step back a little bit, we talked about this last summer because it was something that we wanted to determine which direction we wanted to go on purchasing insurance because it directly affects all of our contractors, our CMGCs and all their subcontractors. So Brown & Brown, who's the district's insurance broker, met with us and went through what are the options, and we selected the DSIP back then that we were going to use that option, and then they helped us write the language for the contracts that we worked with them and then legal counsel to make sure we had it lined out right. In this case, what's in front of you guys is the culmination of developing that program, Brown & Brown going out and securing proposals for all of the insurance. The DSIP is a general liability program that covers the district and all of the general contractors that we hire as CMGCs and all of the subcontractors, vendors, all under one. So it reduces their cost that they charge us. We have one policy that gives a higher level of coverage, up to $50 million of coverage, which very few contractors carry. Most, subcontractors carry $1 million at best. And it has coverage that goes on for 10 years beyond the completion of the project, which is a time period where there's liability. And so this has a long tail coverage to cover. So if anything comes up, a lawsuit that happens, well after the completion of the work, the insurance is still in place all the way through. And this is a program that's used quite extensively with districts like DPL. School districts use it a lot. So both of our CMGCs, Kirby, Nagelhout, as well as some of the West, have worked within the DSIPs like this. Sometimes you'll hear them called OSIP, which is owner, but because we're a district, it's called the DSIP. So they're very familiar with it. As a matter of fact, Kirby and Brown & Brown worked together on a school district project not that long ago where they had a DSIP and are very familiar. So as I said, Brown & Brown went out, secured coverage from carriers. And it actually, if you saw in there's a spreadsheet, I think it's on the second page. Excuse me, it's about the fourth page, it's after there somewhere. The different levels of coverage. And what you see under the second column there called carrier are all the different insurance companies that provide coverage for certain amounts. No one company can write the policy on itself because of its size. So each of these different carriers takes on a portion, and it's to spread risk, risk analysis. And so this is what Brown & Brown has gone through, vetted all of these companies, secured their proposals for the coverage, and then summarized this. And they break it up into the different forms of coverage. So ultimately, and as you see here, the premium on that page is $1.8 million is our baseline premium for all the coverage that we want. And that's what we are going to be finalizing with them. Once we make that authorization, they can go back and finalize it. There's some things of information that they'll still want, that the carriers will want. They literally want to see our soils reports and some of our draft plans, that kind of information. So we'll finalize that with them. But, we've established all of our rates so that it's based on volume of work, how much work. So as we get through, we'll do some adjustments at the end of the bond program based on what was our final cost of construction. Right now, it's based on the estimated cost, including components of the contingency, so that we're in there. So, but this is an insurance plan that we'd like to get put in place. The other component that's in here is the administrator. So these plans are managed or administered by companies. And so we secured a proposal from the company we'd like to use. Brown and Brown actually recommended them. They used them a lot. And that's kind of at the back side of it where there's a proposal. It's probably about $80,000 to $100,000 over the life of the project for their fees. But what they do is they get all of the contractors registered, signed up. They review their insurance that they have to maintain on their own to make sure that they've got that coverage. But they basically administer this program on our behalf. And it's what they do all day in, day out, managing these types of programs. So that's the DSIP program, hopefully in a summary level to you guys, to the extent there's any questions about it. I believe the motion would be that authorizing Todd to engage in, to authorize Brown and Brown to, bind this insurance, and we would bind it, and it would be, like I said, in place for the duration of the project, along with the tail for 10 years afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Do people have any questions about this?
I have one little
Yeah.
clarification. The
Uh-huh.
1.8 million, that's the total premium. I thought that was set, but you're saying that could slide a bit one way or the other?
It will.
Oh, well.
So it's based on our total construction cost, but they will audit us at the end of the project to say, okay, you told us you're going to spend, I'm going to make up a number here, $130 million in construction. What was the final amount? If we're under, they usually don't rebate you any. But if you go over, then it applies at the rates that are already established. Now, in that little summary right down below there, where it's a rate of 4.2 per thousand. And then what so those are rates that Brown has established with them so that at the time of any adjustment. In our budget, and that's why, it's actually slightly higher than this in our budget, so that we have a plan for some expenditure in the future. So because they audit at the end of the day, you don't want to be sitting there with no money and then saying, we need another $50,000. So we'll monitor that throughout.
Okay. Any
yeah.
additional questions?
Yeah. Does anybody else have?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
That's-
On the DSIP, I'm assuming the contractor still maintains all liability for paying the subcontractors.
Yeah.
We're not involved in that at all.
No, this is purely just the general liability insurance coverage, but all of their responsibilities for managing the subcontractors,
So we're
100%. By contract, they're required to make sure that every one of them signs up. Even though we have an administrator that helps them, they are contractually required to make sure that they all get signed up and maintain. Yeah,
Government contract.
yeah.
Okay, good. And on the long tail coverage that we have for 10 years,
Mhm.
is there depreciation of property or anything taken into account for that?
No, there isn't, because it's really about liability.
Uh-huh.
Any type of claim. So our coverage limit doesn't reduce for the life of that time period. So if in year 8, there was some liability claim made against the district, this policy will still be in force at the full limits.
I noticed one of the emphasis on their summary from Brown and Brown. It said, safety is a significant priority for all contractors. And a safety theme. What is a safety theme?
So- Yeah, it's really looking at, and it's something that is written into our contracts with the generals, and they have it in there so that they are maintaining safe, clean, working job sites. That And that has to go to do with how a contractor organizes and manages his job site and his work, that one, that they're clean, organized, that the workers themselves aren't put in harm's way because of poor management processes. And that's something that we, like I said, it's written into their contract, but the insurance companies also, our builders risk policies, which will be a separate type policy, will have the same kind of things that the contractors need to manage their projects in a very clean, safe manner. Now, you know, there's OSHA requirements of what they have to, that's the legal law requirements, and who's the enforcer of safety actually out there. We have it contractually with them. The contractors have a legal requirement through OSHA to comply with all OSHA requirements, whether it's the type of ladders they use and how they have extension cords that aren't frayed. You know, there's a lot of rules that govern construction. So that's what they're talking about, is that maintaining a safe working environment on our job sites is critically important, and it is. It's a good reiteration of a good business practice, operating practice. That you know, I think is there's contractors' means and methods, which is you got it. They have to be responsible for managing their work. We observe those. We point out issues and stuff. They need to know how to correct them and fix them. So we look at that in our weekly meetings and our weekly job site visits when we're under construction. Do we see anything within their organizations, both Kirby and SunWest? They have people that are safety coordinators or safety managers, different things. And these guys are individuals who their role is to look at each of their projects of how they are managing risk and danger, because construction is a very dangerous business. It's not to say it isn't, right? And those safety managers will look at scaffolding plans, how they set up cranes, anything that has potential for, you know, risk or endangerment, and then how do they mitigate that? So that's what they, when they're talking about safety, they're talking about that aspect of the building process.
So that would also include drug testing.
Yeah, drug testing is really governed by the state of what can and can't be done. The contractors do have policies in place in there. They both have standard operating procedures, but safety plans, health, injury, illness. I think I got that right. That they have to produce and maintain. And that really follows along the lines of OSHA, what they require, but also what the state requires on some of those issues. In our contracts, we generally say you need to be always in compliance with the state law and federal laws, because they're the most restrictive and legal.
Would anybody on our side of the table be monitoring that?
We look at, do they have their plans in place?
But actually, are they doing the testing?
You know, the testing is, if there's an incident and they generate an incident report, it will identify, okay, did this trigger a drug test? But that's really where it comes up.
Reactive for their proactive.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of, again, saying, look, this is your responsibility, and we're not going to tell you if you are in compliance, because we don't want to be the compliance person, because we could be wrong relative to what the legal entities, basically the state and OSHA, both federal and state, would be doing. And so we have to kind of walk that fine line of making sure they're doing it, but let the enforcers enforce it to not overstep our bounds. Yeah.
That was along the line that I had, same thing, safety. So the oversight of the safety will be your company, Kirby Nagelhout. So we have several layers of oversight.
Yeah.
Not depending on OSHA, who might not show up. or
Right.
something.
You know, they generally don't show up They can do courtesies. Some of the contractors reach out to them to do courtesies. They show up when somebody calls and complains. But one, they have a very proactive program for safety. So they'll have weekly safety meetings with all their subcontractors. And those are things where we'll ask them about, okay, are those meetings occurring? What's happening? And as they are going through, we look at what's their planning for work activities. So we already looked at a plan with Kirby about where are they going to place cranes? Because that's a high risk element of construction. When you're assembling the building, it's at its least, it's just hanging out there in air until it's all assembled and locked in the frame. And when you're working with cranes and all big equipment, those are areas where there's high potential for accidents. And how do you mitigate that? We look at, is that safety manager actively on site, looking at the programs? Or have we seen him? Superintendents or job site superintendents. So we have 2 senior superintendents, 1 on each of the projects, and that'll be true of all of them. Are the frontline safety guys for the contractors, because they're talking and managing the subcontractor crews every day. And so it's, what are they doing? When I do a site walk, I like to talk with the superintendent of what's going on, what's your risk, what are you doing? To get a feel for, okay, he's thinking about it. When he answers my questions, it's like, does he have to go back and figure it out, or can he answer it to me as I'm walking? Right, I expect him to answer me as I'm walking. Because, but they do. Both of these companies put safety as a high priority. It is not, it's really bad for them to have accidents and problems. Subs don't want to work for them. Their insurance cost goes way up real fast when a contractor has, problems. So they have a very vested interest in, having been on that side, working for generals for many years, safety was often the #1 priority. More so than schedule and cost. It's, if there's a safety issue, it comes first. And they walk that walk.
Yeah, I think we've hired reputable contractors who have good business practices, and that's evidenced by their success and their high rankings in the selection process. And this DSIP coverage seems like it gives us a higher level of protection than we might otherwise have. So does the board have any additional questions, or if not, I would entertain a motion.
Just one last question on the risk management. We have the premium allocations, the credit services, and optional. I assume we're going to execute that, right?
Yes.
Want to have that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the way they structure their proposal, and that's one of those things that as we authorize them to engage, we'll go through and accept all of those elements of what their role is.
Okay. Good.
Okay. Would anyone like to make a motion?
I think, Todd, you had a motion that.
Yeah. I think there are some suggested language, so we get the right words in place.
Okay.
I'll do this.
Okay.
I move to authorize the library director to authorize Brown & Brown Insurance to bind the district-specific insurance program, DSIP, coverage and execute the DSIP administrator agreement in an amount not to exceed $2 million.
Okay, do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Okay, and we'll just acknowledge that Cynthia was absent for that vote.
I beg your pardon?
Then we
Oh,
will
Cynthia was
acknowledge-
absent for that vote. Okay, thank you.
Unless you want to vote right now.
You want to vote quick?
Cynthia, would you care to vote on the motion regarding the DSIP program?
Yes, I vote in favor.
Okay,
Okay.
let the minutes show that. Okay, our next item of business is action on the Central and Redmond Library schematic designs, which we reviewed at our work session.
Yeah, and this is really generated by part of our contract with Miller Hall is that we tell them they need to present progress designs throughout the course based on our schedule, and that we will review and approve those designs as they go. And that is one, so they have their assurance that what they're continuing to draw is been reviewed by all of us and approved by us. And so this is really what we're asking for your guys' approval today is the schematic designs that were presented are acceptable and approved by the board. It's, I don't want to say a technicality, you know, but it is something we need to do so that we can confidently tell Miller Hall, keep going, draw as you are expected to do, you know, to develop the designs. And I tried to put in the summary to make sure you guys understood. This is not a final approval. This is a progress approval, like we talked about, what the basic site plan looks like, what the basic building, you know, its size, its shape, its location, but all of the more specific details of exact materials and the fine details in the interior designs will come in a later phase, right? We actually approve the design development will be the next phase and ultimately construction documents. So we have ample opportunities to ask questions, tell us what we like, what we don't like, and continue to approve this all the way through. We're almost doing a similar approval process like what the city would. City looks at code, we look at design and how the building's going to function and operate. So that's the purpose of asking you to approve what you saw on the 28th, unless there's questions about that. Yep.
I guess I'm concerned about moving forward with this today. And it's really based on the community being a part of this project. And the community provided us with great input, very thoughtful. The board doesn't have an opportunity to go over that input until March 7th. And so I guess I'm feeling I would like to table this until after our March 7th work session, just so we as a board can kind of discuss all the public input that was presented to us. The architects did a marvelous job on their presentation and all of that, but I don't think we've had as a board an opportunity to go back and look at what our community members are, you know, their input into what they would like our libraries to be.
Yes, I do.
Would the community really have input into the actual location and the site? I agree. I want the input on what the individual libraries are going to look like. But I question that on this, at least what I've read, I haven't seen many patrons coming in and saying anything on this specific.
I know in my review of the input, there were several questions about parking and accessibility and just kind of the, you know, the site plan in that respect. So I know there is some concern also with transportation. How are we going to get people there, biking, walking, you know, cars? So there is discussion in the community about maybe the overall accessibility of that site. And also several comments about parking and what that is going to look like on that site.
But
So,
it's- we're not looking at a design that's saying this is specifically where the parking lot is, are we?
Well, the design shows you where the lots are. You know, there's 3 parking lots laid out now, and there's a layout of those designs. But even those, while it's, you know, the 3 different parking lots and how the streets are going to align, those are what are really kind of fixed is, hey, we're going to put parking on this side of the building and this side of the building. We're going to put our 3 roads, Jameson, the extension, which is pretty fixed. The extension of Britta, and then the Roble Street. Now, the designs of those streets, and I'm going to walk through parts, pieces to help, hopefully answer your question. The design of the streets is going to be driven by the city requirements. They tell us, here's how you design it. And then our civil engineer, our traffic engineer, they work with the city to say, okay, this is what this street, how wide the components of that. The alignment of the streets are really driven kind of off the master plan of how the existing streets will extend. So that kind of locks us into how our site breaks up into the 2 components, as you can actually see the right plan there. So that piece is fairly well set, and that is really going to be governed by ODOT and the city of Bend ultimately, how we build those streets. The actual layout of the parking lot, while we've identified the 3 lots, those lots are still in design. How do they adjust to be very efficient for the flow of traffic, to give us the layout that's going to work with things, whether it's the parking and walking in, what's the best way for members to enter into the building from there, the connectivity from the building out to the outer lot will continue to be looked at, of how pedestrians walk between those, how we will plow the snow, right? Lighting, potential use of our renewable energy that we may have PV arrays actually out in our parking lots. So those components, and then the landscaping aspect, you know, those, when you think about parking lots in the site, a lot of it's landscaping. That design will continue to mature and go through, and it's based on the feedback that we're getting. So all of the public outreach that we had in November and December, at that time where we showed them our designs, and the comments that the team got back have been taken into consideration. The comments that we got from city staff members, what they were at, what their concerns were. So, you know, one of the concerns people we heard out there was, we don't want the parking lot to look like a Costco, right? A big sea of asphalt. And so they really worked to try and break up our parking lots across the property to really integrate a lot of landscaping, and that will continue to occur. So I think that what you're really approving at this time is this high level concept that our property is divided into 2 pieces: the layout of the streets, the area where the parking lots are going to go within the site, and then where we position the building, you know, where it's at there, and the basic shape of that. And the shape of the building is actually, it works with how do we fit in the natural contours of the land, because we're embedding into a hillside on one, and then all along our street or highway frontage over there with the highway. So Miller Hall worked with the city to say, okay, what are our legal requirements of what the code requires, building code, as far as how our building faces Highway 20. And City of Bend actually has very specific requirements of the amount of building that has to be within a certain distance from the property line, from that frontage. And as well as height of buildings and all of that. In siting the building, of locating it and sizing it, whether it's its height and its massing, is really a function of that. It's a function of many things. It's one is that building code. How are we going to interface? And so that is something that we're at a point where it's like, okay, that's where it's going to be, and it's going to be this shape. The shape is driven not just by building code, because we have limits, but then it's, okay, how do we, they talked about how they angled the building, the two pieces to really capture the views and the architectural appearance, how it's going to be viewed by the public from outside, whether they're traveling on the roads or walking. So I think that is the component that we're really wanting to say, yes, we're good with where our building is. It's massing and size. The final finishes are going to change, but in the structure, we identified a structure that will always continue to develop structurally. The back parking lot, I kind of skipped over that. That's a very functional parking lot for the district, and staff parking. It's all of the delivery system. It's how we develop a system to allow for the drop off to occur, and it really helps us create a good separation between staff and operational activity and the community activity, parking being out front. So I think that this level of approval is timely at this point, because we're going through those. The continued development process where we'll keep going to get community involvement and feedback coming in, I think it's it's already scheduled, further meetings for doing that process. Am I talking to your concern, or I'm not sure?
No, you are. It's just that I've spent a lot of time going over the community input that we got, and it just very much appreciated their concerns, but also their great suggestions on what they want in our library. And we just, as a board, haven't had that opportunity to really go through those concerns and suggestions. And so for me, I would feel more comfortable making or approving this after we've had an opportunity in our next work session to kind of go through that. So really what I'm thinking is just tabling it, not saying, no, we don't approve or don't go forward, but just tabling it so that we have an opportunity to have a real meaningful discussion as a board.
So
Well,
if we were to table it, and that means we wouldn't make a decision until our March board meeting, how would this impact the architect, the plan, the moving forward?
It would be that I would be asking DPL, Todd, if we are to continue forward while you guys study it without your blessing, or if we are being directed to stop work.
I would interpret that as stop work.
Okay.
We're talking about millions of dollars that we keep pushing forward.
Which, if we were to wait that, it would be a significant matter for them to stop at this point. Because they probably have, I don't know their full team, but there's easily 50 to 100 people between them and all their consultants that are working full-time on this, just moving along. So if it's something where you guys have a concern about us proceeding, you would need to tell us that you would want us to stop. And that's something that I can't make that decision. It'd be something I'd look to you and Todd to give us that direction.
I agree with Ann, because we did ask for public input in the online survey that we did. And having read through every single one of these comments on all the library facilities, I struck like my data says it was like the central library had 141 responses that actually said specifically about the central library. And of those that actually gave their comments, made a comment on it, 66% expressed real concerns or absolutely against this location. That made me stop and read everything all over again. And I said, there's a concern out there. Granted, the number is very small, 141 people responding, but it's the latest that we have. We asked for it. If we don't actually sit down as a board and go over the responses that the public gave to us, I don't think we're not being responsive to the people who put us into this hall. We represent the public. We work for the betterment of the entire community. My concern is we go forward with schematic, prove this schematic design, it's almost been a blessing to say, we're going to tell the public, this is the site we're going to use. This is pretty much the design we're going to be using. The design of the central library, the demolition of the Redmond library, and the thing that struck me with Redmond library too is, I mean, there were not that many responses, but those who said something about the library itself. It also came out to be 66% said, isn't there any way you can save the central library and build another one to give us the additional space and everything? And people were coming out saying North Redmond. And I don't know whether they're saying they want it in North Redmond. It gives me enough concern that we should sit back, discuss the results that we have from the latest survey. Maybe if we have to, really discuss as we go forward, because if this board can't be in consensus, I mean, this is not a unanimous decision on these facility plans. I'm worried that we lose the public trust, not in the board, not in just the board, but in the library system. People trust the library because it's the source of unbiased, truthful information. And if they don't think we're listening to them, and even if it's only half the community, we stand a good chance of losing trust. And once you lose trust, it's awfully hard to get back. I think we owe it to the public to at least discuss, read every single comment we have, come back here as a board, discuss what we've read, go through it thoroughly, decide what we want to do as the next step. Because even if we say, yes, we approve these schematics, only in general, at a very high level, we're already saying that's the site, that's the structure, this is what we're going to do to Redmond, this is what we're going to do to Pine and Sun River. The rest of it after that is merely icing.
I have a comment to that, a couple of them. One, and if you had any specific concerns over the comments versus the site plans, I would want to know about it. Then my other thoughts are, we paid this guy a lot of money. We paid our architects a lot of money. And we gave them the task to go out to the public and get their input. And the last time I know the architects presented, they seem to be very much engaged with these public comments. So to me, we paid these people a lot of money to incorporate these comments. I don't disagree that as a board, we should talk about it, but I feel like that they have incorporated these comments. And then as far as the public losing confidence in us, I'm afraid if we do something differently, the public will lose confidence in us because you've only got 141 people. There's 100,000 people in Bend who, however many voted on this bond issue. So we don't have 70,000, whatever voted on this bond issue. We have this little handful. And so I think that public trust could vastly shift if we don't move on and we don't spend this money correctly. So I think we have entrusted people that we pay a lot of money for to incorporate. And I feel confident that those architects have really looked at those comments.
Can I come in 2 points? One is, we keep saying that we won the bond issue election, that we won the bond. We won by 3.8%. On that same November election, every other financial vote ballot for a library that year, with the exception of one which failed because it went with Parks and Rec. Every single one won by 20 to 30%.
Ray, I think that the results of the bond election are a fact. And we're not here to look at the past, we're here to look at the future. And the bond was approved. And we've been tasked with carrying out these projects. So let's keep our focus on executing what the voters have said that they want us to do.
3.8%.
Right, we beat the Bend transportation law. We
That's
beat
not
the
a
Bend
library.
transportation law
Let's,
as well.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is not, I don't think that this is a matter that is going to yield any fruit. I think that we've discussed this previously, and the bond was approved, and that's a factual statement. And it doesn't matter, they are not degrees of approval. There is a yes or no vote, and the voters said yes to this. And we can debate why the margin was the way it was, but that's not constructive right now.
I'm saying we should interpret what the margin tells us.
A win is a win. We won.
Yeah, we're not, I don't, we have work in front of us here, and we have a question in front of us here. So let's not go back into the past. We've had this discussion on multiple occasions in the past, and we need to be focused on the work that the board needs to do in the future.
May I address the board regarding the financial impacts of a decision?
But I have one more thing, is the architects, I remember the architects telling us their analysis of the community inputs from the last poll.
Oh, they did, they talked a lot about that.
They talked a lot about the design and everything, but they didn't come right out and say, here's what the public told us in the last community input.
I think, well, I think that they did address that, Ray. And I think it's up to each of us to determine how well those comments were addressed. You know, I think you and Ann have both said that you've read all the comments, and I think all the rest of us have read all the comments and have good awareness of what those comments said. And that's our job as board members to really study and look at that public input. I think it's also appropriate to look at the level of detail and the decision that we have before us today, as far as what the impacts of that are on the project and where we are in the construction process. Incumbent in that is what decisions have already been made in past meetings as we have moved this project forward. And I think Greg is presenting us with a logical progression of our approval processes. As he said, we have dozens and dozens of people that are working on this full time. And essentially what you're asking is that we go back and reconsider the site as a whole, whether or not we're going to cite libraries on the land that we have selected, and whether we're going to whether we're going to redo the basic size and shape of the buildings. And I guess my opinion is that that the sites have been selected. The sites were publicized in advance of the election. We told the voters, this is where we're intending to build these libraries. We did general ideas of what the plans were. So the voters had that information when they voted. And I agree with what Bunny said, that if you look at loss of trust in the library district, I think that going back on what we told the voters before the election would be a profound, damaging decision. So I feel like those decisions have been made, and you know, I think there are lots of concerns and lots of great constructive ideas in the public comments that we got. And I think that staff and the architects are working to incorporate those, but I think we need to be conscious about keeping our board level decisions on board level actions before us. And I think our responsibility as a board is to bring these projects in on budget, in the scope that we told the voters that we were going to do, and on time. And delays, as Greg mentioned earlier, cost money. They will have impacts, and so I am not in favor of tabling this decision. But I will leave it to the board to decide whether or not we're going to vote on this today. I would entertain a motion.
Well, I
I'll
think
make a motion.
Is Ann making a motion to table?
That was my intent.
Okay, we have a motion to table.
Pending our work session on March 7th.
Okay, do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion?
Yeah, I just reiterate, I think we owe it to the public. It's our duty to the public to actually discuss as a board their input. Yes, we're paying people a lot of money, but it's our responsibility. And we should be doing, we need to do our homework, read all of this and discuss it as a board and reach a conclusion as a board. We can take into account what other people have told us, our consultants. But we need to have the discussion at the board level as a board. And I think we do that by tabling this until after our work session. Interesting.
Okay, do we have any other comments? Okay, if not, all those in favor of tabling this decision until after our work session, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion fails. I would entertain a motion. Any other motions on this?
I'd like to move that we approve the overall site plans, building location and configuration, the general building sizes and major components as outlined in the architect's January 28, 2022 board work session presented on the Central and Redmond Library facilities.
I'll second.
Okay. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. All right, next up is the Redmond Library land discussion. Todd?
Thank you. As we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but basically the parking lot at the Redmond Library and the pocket park there, title is owned by the city of Redmond. The city of Redmond has already voted to hand that land over to us at a cost of $0. And I just want to point out that this is where your executive limitations work. I was very excited to run down to the county and file and thought about it and said, well, there's one thing that it says the director shall not, and that's the real property transaction without board approval. So that's what I have here. I will say I highly recommend that the board accept this land. It is free land. It's for the benefit of the district. And so that is what I'm seeking with that. And with that, I would file it with the Deschutes County if this motion, if this process passes.
Okay. Any questions for Todd? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I move to accept the January 20th, 2022 quit claim deed from the city of Redmond, granting the Deschutes Public Library District real property as outlined in Exhibit
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
One clarification. No matter what we do at the Redmond Library, whether we remodel or rebuild, property still is ours. It's not contingent.
That's correct. This quick claim.
Quick claim,
No
no
contingencies.
contingencies.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, any further discussion or questions? All those in favor?
I,
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Okay. Next up is fund balance policies.
Okay. And there. The fund balance policy, just a reminder, this is you're required by our governmental accounting standards to have this policy, and it basically is saying how much money you will carry forward in our general fund each year. And the board has the ability to set that. And back in 2014, I believe, we passed that we said we would keep a minimum 17% balance carried forward. We discuss this every year at the budget hearing. But one thing we said at the time was this is something that the board should keep track of. And so I put it in front of you every year just to remind you that it's there. I do not have any recommendations for changing at this point. We are carrying forward in excess of 17% on a regular basis. It has not been a challenge for us to keep that amount. So my recommendation is to do nothing. At this point is to keep it as it is. But mainly want to make sure it's in front of you. It's just a good reminder for us that we have made this policy.
Do any of the new members on the board want to know why it was 17% and not another number, not arbitrary number?
Not 15.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember we talked about it last year.
And
Yeah.
I can explain them.
Actually, to tell you the truth, since 2015, I don't remember how we got to 17.
I was fascinated to you because I don't remember.
I don't.
Yeah,
I think it's so many months worth.
There's a gen, tend to remember there was a general recommendation of at least 12%, and we just kind of tacked on a little bit.
yeah. I think
Understanding
an
that-
approximate number that everybody felt comfortable with. And I would say, Anne, if you found the motion, if you found the wording of this resolution confusing, we have found it confusing every time that it's come before us, and it's set by budget law, not by us. So this is one of them.
Incidentally, 17% is 2 months worth.
Oh,
On a
Oh, okay.
straight- Yeah,
Which
2
makes-
two
Yeah.
months.
Which makes
Okay.
sense, I think, the tax season.
Get you to November.
Getting-
Yeah, get you to tax season.
I remember it's months and not percentage.
Yeah, there you go. There was a lot of agreement.
Yeah.
Okay. So any comments or questions? Okay. We don't need a motion on that. So we have our financials for the second quarter.
It's all right, I'll take my mask off for this. We can
Okay,
hear me better. Okay, thank you very much for being with me to take you through the second quarter financial report. So this goes from October through December of last year, and it reflects our financial position as of the end of 2021. So no January or any February numbers included in that. So if you look at the first page in this report, this is our cash reconciliation report. It gives us a snapshot of where all the district funds reside. And it is a modified cash position, so it's not just the actual dollars in each account, but it is also some of the additional anticipated revenues or anticipated outflows in the short term. The first 4 lines, the A through D, commercial checking, merchant account, all the way down to government investment pool, represent our operating cash, our grant monies, and our cash reserve, the reserve fund money. So looking at those 4, you can see that our government investment pool in particular has sufficient cash reserves to cover the rest of the current fiscal year's budgeted expenditures, plus well in excess of the minimum fund balance that we would want to carry forward into the following fiscal year. So we're in a good position for our operating cash and reserves. The next 3 lines, those E through G above the total cash line, represent the cash on hand for our capital projects and bond-related expenditures, such as the bond servicing. So looking at that, the reserve fund specifically, that's the bond debt service fund, that one that sits at 7.6 million, is the fund as of December 31st. So that's after we made our first December interest-only payment against the debt for the capital projects. And so that balance right there is sufficient to make the June interest plus principal payment that's on our schedule, plus having sufficient carry forward into the following fiscal year to cover the next interest-only payment, depending, or basically to mitigate any risk of shortfall in next year's tax assessment. A couple other highlights on this one, the total balance at the bottom line. If we look at it compared to last quarter when I presented on the Q1 financial statement, we did see an overall $17 million increase in the cash balance. That's largely due to the very large, we collect tax assessment every month, But November represents the vast majority of the assessment collections. And so we see that mostly in Q2 because that's kind of the high water mark, and then we start to spend through the rest of the year. Another thing to highlight here is you'll notice that the reserve fund, if you compared it against last quarter, now the reserve fund balance reflects that reallocation of costs that we discussed last time. So the cost of the land purchase for Central Library and the due diligence associated with that got reallocated into the capital projects fund. And so the balance on the reserve fund represents closer to where we had expected it to be at the beginning of the fiscal year. Overall, the takeaway on the cash reconciliation report is that our cash position is strong. We're in a good position to manage all district financial obligations. Okay, going on to the financial highlights. So we have kind of a bulletized synopsis on these pages here, but they really do reflect the major takeaways for all of the financial pages that are on the remainder of this report. So we'll look at each fund in turn. Again, since we're halfway through the year, we would expect that budget expended for most things that would have regular expenditures to be at around 50%. And we like to just highlight and do a spot check to check any of those expenditures where it's above or below that general 50% mark in this report. So in terms of general fund, resources are tracking very closely to expectation at this point in the fiscal year. As I mentioned, a lot of our resources come in Q2. So we're sitting at around 96% resource on the general fund. We collected on our various contracts and agreements with outside entities like Jefferson County and Crook County and the Law Library. And so our resources are good for this point in the year. In terms of regular expenditures, the ones that are tracking closely to expectation are the ones you would imagine, because they're the ones that have regular cycles on a monthly or quarterly basis. So things like salary and benefits are on track for mid-year. Our collections acquisitions are on track for mid-year as well, because we're making regular collection purchases throughout the year. Insurance payments that are monthly, postage and freight tends to track as a linear effect. Utilities payments, things like that. So those are all on track at more or less 50%, maybe a couple percent above or below. One area that did run higher than expected was our auditing costs for the previous fiscal year. When I say higher than expected, it was, now looking back, something that we may have expected, and that is the additional complexity of the fiscal year, the first fiscal year, where we had set up the bond funds and really were starting to account for capital expenditures on these building projects. It did require an additional amount of hours from the auditor in order to make sure that we were doing everything correctly. And you saw from the auditor's report that all of the findings that were identified were related to that. So that is where a lot of energy was spent. It's definitely something that we will take into consideration when we're building up the budget for next fiscal year. Let's see, other areas where we underspent. So just want to highlight a couple of these. In general, the big takeaway was that we're underspending because the impacts of the pandemic are still being felt. So what are some of the areas where we saw that? Library programming, which shows up in our contractual services, that was an underspend to budget. Education and travel, because we're not sending people as many places for training or for attendance at events. Staff meeting support, things like general in-person meetings. We've done a lot of those kinds of things, either hybrid or remotely, and staff day did have to get postponed. So that does represent a decent chunk of the staff meeting support budget. Print materials. So one thing that we didn't do and we're starting up again was things like the events guide being print. So we've gone online with a lot of our print materials and only just started to start those things back up, and so that's not going to be reflected yet in the Q2 financials. Volunteer related costs, again, we did see a downtrend relative to where things were pre-COVID, and we're coming back, but it's not as coming back as much or as quickly as maybe we budgeted when we put this together in this time last year. As far as capital expenditures, so there, the story is supply chain delays. So I can speak for one of the big capital expenditures that I was projecting in the facilities area and part of my department. And that is that we've placed a purchase order for a facilities truck, but delivery of that truck is still very much TBD, and it has been for 3 months I think anyone's guess is as good as mine as to why it's delayed. So it stands every chance of not arriving before the end of the fiscal year and us needing to carry that forward. There are a couple other elements like that. Another place that we're seeing underspend on capital in capital expenditures in this particular fund is some things that perhaps were identified as building improvement initiatives before we really got into full swing with both the owners' representatives and the architects, that we are now reconsidering and deciding, okay, what's the timing of them? The things I talked about last month with asset protection. Some things make sense to defer, some things make sense to fold into the capital projects, and some things don't make sense at all because the capital projects themselves, those renovations and improvements, are going to go in a different direction, say, than what we had planned. So those are the big things for Fund 100, or the general fund. Looking at the reserve fund next. So at this point, I can say that we are fully resourced for the fiscal year. However, no expenditures are anticipated this fiscal year. So we're going to be carrying this forward into next fiscal year. Now, why is that? Well, there were two main projects that were associated with and included in the adopted budget. One of which was the mobile library van. And if you think it's hard to get a standard F-150 pickup truck, try coming up with a custom built mobile library system, just developing the requirements, let alone getting into the order cycle for that. That is going to have to carry it to next fiscal year. And I think the other one was the RFID kiosks. And that one, I think we, again, in light of the overall plans for capital improvements, we're taking a look at when it makes sense to do that, how it makes sense to do that. Does it take the kind of form that was originally projected in that proposal, or does it look like something else given some of the other changes coming? So anyway, I would expect in the next quarter when I present this, that expenditures line is still going to be zero, and it'll carry forward in some form into the future. Grant funds. So this one is at 68% resourced. It's partly because the balance forward was lower than anticipated, and just partly because that's kind of where we are at in the annual cycle. So not all grant monies have been received, but we're still kind of tracking through the year. Expenses, we're seeing the majority of grant fund expenditures come from three main grants: the IMLS grant, the Ready to Read that just concluded at the end of 2021, so we haven't seen yet Ready to Read 2022 expenditures show up, and a novel idea. We started to see those expenditures show up in this particular quarter that we're reporting on in anticipation of the 2022 novel idea cycle. Grant Projects Fund. So we've already talked a bit about this in Greg's monthly report. Greg gives a great level of detail in terms of where the expenditures are going and how things are tracking. So all I'll say for this one, the main takeaways are that we are fully resourced for the fiscal year, that the capital outlay that we're looking at does include things like all of the various contractor fees, things like owners' representatives fees, architect fees. CMGC started showing up in this particular quarter for Kirby Eagle and SunWest Builders just in that last month of that quarter. In general, I know Ray, you had asked last quarter, what was the overall amount that we're looking in terms of spend, and it is starting to accelerate. So in the first quarter, it looked like we were doing about $375,000, $385,000 a month in Q1, July, August, September. In this most recent quarter that we're reporting, that has increased to about $500,000 per month. And as we do more work with the contractors and dig deeper with the architects and bring on a few other of the smaller contracts, we do expect that to continue to increase quarter by quarter, so that the monthly spend will probably ramp up another. Actually, I don't want to peg a number, but we do expect that to increase. And overall, it should fall well below what we had budgeted for expenditures. We'll take a look at that trend line and work with Greg when we're putting together the proposed budget for next fiscal year for this fund. Finally, with debt service fund. So this one is 90% resourced, which as far as what our expenditures are, we are fully resourced for the fiscal year. As I pointed out on that cash reconciliation report, we currently have cash on hand in this fund in order to make the other payment that is part of this fiscal year. And that's an interest plus principal payment in June 1st of 2022. That's a typo. I'm sorry about that. On my report, it says June 1st, 2021. We will not be going back in time to make that payment. And so we will be able to carry forward enough so that we will have a good reserve in the balance forward for any kind of unplanned outcomes in terms of tax assessments. So that concludes my walk through the report. And now I'd like to open up to questions. I'll throw my mask back on.
Do you have any questions?
I do, and I think you covered this, but I'm not an accountant. I'm an engineer, not an accountant. So I struggle. The expected % of budget expended for this period is 50%, but yet it's only 1 quarter.
Oh, I should say the expected year-to-date expenditure, right? So if you start the year at July 1st, and all of these numbers that I'm reporting on are cumulative to the beginning of the fiscal year. They're not just the quarterly expenditures. These reports, if you look at I understand the confusion because the headers, the information does say it's reporting for what's between period October 1 to December 31st.
Yeah.
However, the actual column is a cumulative that goes to the beginning of the fiscal year. I'll take a look at that report and try and figure out a way to label it so it's more clear. Because it is a report on Q2, and yet it is also reporting in terms of expended. What's our % expenditure all the way through to basically that December 31st from the start of the fiscal year. Yeah.
And our fiscal year starts October 1.
No, ma'am, it starts July 1st. So yeah, we go July 1st to June 30th, which is why, incidentally, that's why we would expect the year to date at December 31st, about 50%.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Any other questions? I had one on the grants fund.
Yeah.
Just about those lower than expected revenues. Is there anything significant in that, or like what is coming in lower than expected?
I can answer that one.
Mhm.
When we're budgeting, when I'm budgeting in April, I'm trying to figure out how much money we're gonna have left on July 1.
Oh,
What I've seen in the past is if I underguess that, we're in a situation where we're having to run multiple motions to approve that change. But if I overestimate how much we're bringing in, that doesn't really affect us at all. And so in this case, I overestimated. We actually spent more towards the last 3 months of the year, and that's why we didn't carry as much forward. So it's either way, it's a weird one way or the other. I've done it different ways, different years. And I kind of landed on it's better to assume that I might carry more forward just in case.
okay. That makes perfect sense. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't in some odd situation with payment.
Yeah, our most difficult one is the rated read grant, because that covers our summer reading funds. And the budget falls right in the middle. It falls in the middle of 2 budgets.
Yep.
And
Right.
so I try to have enough money so we can buy stuff in June. And And so in this case, we probably bought more in June than anticipated. So
Okay.
no major disasters happened. We didn't lose any grants or anything like that.
Okay, well, no, I assumed not. I assumed we would have heard about that, but I just was wondering.
If you go to that report, or that page that has the report, you see, we actually outperformed what we had projected for other grants. So, yeah, we're not in a case where there was money that we were counting on that hasn't showed up.
Right. Okay, thank you. That answers my questions. Any other questions or?
Yeah, on the debt service,
Yes,
are we gonna be having alternate, every 6 months, we're gonna have a payment for principal and interest, and then interest only,
yes.
all the way through?
All the way through for 20 years. So the way it's structured is that it's a little bit different than like a home mortgage. Like a mortgage, the percentage of principal increases and the percentage of interest decreases in terms of the payments. But unlike a home mortgage, the principal payments actually ramp up a decent amount every year. And so one of the reasons why we're building in a little bit of a reserve at the front of the 20-year period is because we need to have that reserve to kind of carry us through and make sure that we're continuing to be able to meet an increasing amount of principal payments. It's not just the proportion of a flat payment that's higher principal. It is actually dollar value going to increase. Our payment amounts are going to increase every June to pay an increasing amount of principal. And so we want to make sure that we're managing that very closely, especially kind of taking a look from year to year at economic factors and how good is the tax assessment and what are property values looking like and all of that. So each year, this time around, Todd and I are meeting with the county assessor to do those kinds of crystal ball educated guess of, well, where do we think the tax base is going to be going into next year?
Crystal ball.
Yeah.
What was our, so now we're past December, November, what's in the percentage of taxes paid? 96 or?
It is on the first page of the general fund report.
If you're asking what percentage of people are paying,
No.
oh, okay.
In terms of dollars, so our current taxes, we've collected on 93% of what we had projected from the county assessor when we worked this out last year. And that's for like, so there's two assessments, right? So there's the general fund assessment. So we collected 93% from what was anticipated. Yeah, and then for the debt servicing bond measure, we've collected something like 90% of what was anticipated in terms of the overall tax collection, tax assessment. Yeah,
But we will continue to get those funds coming in throughout the rest of the fiscal year.
Right.
correct.
And so those numbers are on trend for us to probably exceed
Yeah.
what we expected for the general income taxes, and I'm not totally sure, but we'll probably be right about where we want them to be on that.
The biggest reason for that difference, by the way, is because the clock started later for the bond debt servicing, right? We didn't have any tax collection in July, August, September, and October related to that because it was a new tax assessment. So it's a little bit behind the curve, whereas the general fund was collecting those 4 months. And so it's those 4 monthly tax assessments before the big one in November that you're seeing that difference between 93 and 90%.
Those previously owed taxes, but they never really amounted to more than maybe 1%.
Yeah, the previously owed taxes, so our collection rate there is less high. It's around 69, 70%. However, the dollar amount is like, it's 2 orders of magnitude smaller.
Right.
So yeah, it's just not, it is literally pennies on the dollar. It's 2 orders of magnitude
Yeah.
smaller. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, are we seeing anything because of the pandemic recession occurring? We've been running previous year, fiscal year, where we're running at 95, 96%.
I can look into where we were at
By
the
recollection,
end of Q2
It
last
hasn't dropped
last year.
tremendously since, was it 2019.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
I'll,
surprised me.
Now you're talking about how many people are paying.
yeah,
And it's been hovering around 96, 97% for the last few years.
yes, in terms of people paying, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
actually, when I budget for lower than that.
Yeah, which is good.
Yeah, it's just conservative.
I'll also say that the, one of the other reasons why you see a dollar shortfall or a variance there on previously levied taxes is economically based. The county goes back and reassesses some of the corporate tax assessments that they've done on
Right.
various entities. And so every month or two, we get a letter from the county assessor saying, we actually overassessed this particular entity. And, you know, sometimes it's like, we charge the utility too much. And so we're giving them a refund. And of course, you all are paying for it because you all benefited from that assessment.
Right.
Just for information, on the grant funds, how much are we getting from the foundation?
So I don't believe the foundation monies show up in the,
All of the funds that came for the novel idea, for our collection, and there was one other,
It was.
youth initiative.
yes,
Those are all from the foundation.
okay.
Which was.
I'd have to go back and look at our budget. But that's-
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but we haven't, I think this year, part by the novel idea. I think we don't have it in, it's not, we don't call it grant.
Foundation.
We treat it like a grant
Yeah,
in our budget.
in our
Yeah,
budget.
because they say what it's going to be for.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just interested. to get that figured.
Yeah, Sean, too bad Sean told us.
Yeah, right.
She could have told you that off the top of her head.
Yeah.
But if you do want to get a sense of it, it's on the, when you look at the budget, it's under the grants page, it breaks down each one of those. And I list which ones are foundation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, they got the budget.
Huh?
Okay, good. And Ready to
Okay.
Read is Undated, huh?
No,
Ready to Read has continued to be funded. So, yeah, we were kind of afraid of it disappearing a couple
Yeah,
years
we
ago.
made it
but
through
did
the
not.
Trump years.
Yeah.
yeah.
We didn't say that.
Okay. Thank you, Robert. Next up is the budget calendar.
Okay.
Todd, do you want to introduce this?
And so, a couple of things by budget law that have to happen. You have to appoint a budget officer and you need to adopt a budget calendar. So that's what's listed here. Typically, and for our organization, that has usually been the library director. The adopted calendar, there's 4 main points that need to be in that calendar, and those are the bolded items. That you appoint the budget officer, that you appoint the budget committee vacancies, and then the budget committee meets, and then you meet again to adopt. The library board meets to adopt. As far as when the budget committee meets, that will be the budget committee will consist of the board plus 5 citizens that have been selected by the board to serve on that committee, and that forms the budget committee. So the rest of the dates that I put in there are just kind of just to show you that these other things will be happening. I'm going to make a plug for that Oregon budget law training that I sent an email out about. It's a great training. If you don't have a chance to attend one of them, they did say after they have done their trainings, they're going to post a recording of one of them. So you can go through it, especially for those of you that have taken it a couple of times and just want a quick refresher. That might be a good one. I will, and the last piece I'll highlight on this is the budget committee members are for 3-year terms. We have one budget committee member whose term expired at the end of last fiscal year. And so we will need to go out to fill that vacancy. In this case, Betsy Tucker will have the ability, if she's interested, to reapply. And so that one, I am required to get, based on your policy, to have the board chair allow me to publicize for the vacancy. Which I think I actually did by email, but you might want to make it official here and have Ann direct me to do so. So a couple of actions need to happen. We need to appoint the budget officer, we need to adopt the calendar, and need direction on filling that last week.
Okay. Any questions on this?
Ray's making a motion.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing Ray.
Here's my mask.
Okay,
To appoint the library director, Todd Dunkelberg, as our budget officer. The next budget cycle.
I'll second.
any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Okay. Do we need would someone like to make a motion about adopting the budget calendar?
Hello, I move to adopt the budget calendar.
Do we hear a second?
Second.
Second, okay. All those in favor? Aye.
Discussion.
Oh, sorry.
I won't be here on the 11th. Can we possibly move it to the 18th?
The 11th,
Right.
isn't that just the budget committee? Don't we meet on June the 8th?
We meet as the budget.
You
committee,
are
and then
part of the budget.
Oh, yeah.
You're part of the budget committee, so that's an important one.
Can we move it 1 week? I will hopefully still be finally getting back to Hawaii. I need a break.
Does that work for people?
Because normally we don't have a second meeting. as
Right.
part of the change to the budget. I'm assuming there won't be.
I'll be out of town on the 18th.
Okay. Are there any other dates that work? Anytime after the 17th works for me.
Um,
Can you zoom in on that?
No, I'll be in the air.
Oh,
Oh. That's a problem.
yeah.
No, I don't know if we have any, our condo change ownership. I have no idea if we have Wi-Fi or whatever.
I will not be here on the 18th. Theoretically, it's determined, it has to do with whether or not the trip that I have planned actually occurs, which is questionable.
Yeah, everything's going on.
Yeah, right, exactly. So if
The 19th
two of us are going to be gone on the 18th, maybe we ought to leave it on the 11th unless people can move it to the 4th. Would that cramp you, Todd?
The 4th of June?
No, the 4th of May.
I still won't be here.
Okay, yeah.
Now, from April 7th, April 17th to May 17th, I'll be out of here.
Okay. Well, two of us will be gone on the 18th. I mean, on the 18th. So maybe we better leave it on the 11th. Does that sound okay to people? I mean, I hate to have you miss it, Ray, but
Is the 19th work, or are you gonna be gone, Ann, from the 18th on
yeah, I'll be gone from the 13th on
until?
June.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm
no,
gonna find
that
out
doesn't-
if your condo has Wi-Fi.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, we do that.
Is there a public library there?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a public library card.
It'd be early in the morning, so they wouldn't be open.
It won't be open until we get an hour. Kick us off. It's not like ours. What is that? No.
Well,
Okay, I'll make it work.
Okay.
okay, all right, well, let's leave it on the 11th. I'm sorry, it's, I know we've moved it in the past to try to get everybody there, but, okay, well, we'll proceed along those lines.
I'd say that might be good, because we've got, I've already sent the date out to the budget committee members and they're.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or questions?
I just want to highlight that this is a draft schedule for the 22-23 budget, not the 21-22 budget. I can't tell me.
Okay. As corrected then. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. And then is it, shall we just by consensus, direct Todd to advertise for budget?
And then based on your policies, and I just need direction from you.
Okay, I so direct you.
Thank you.
Okay. And then we have on our annual calendar.
Okay, so I put in here our annual calendar policy, which basically says that we will have an annual calendar. And I drafted an annual calendar, so let's look at that. Let's see. There we go. A couple of things to note in this calendar is I did put back in the concept of traveling to each branch. And we have tested out, we do know that we have the technical capability to continue the hybrid meetings no matter where we are, so that's good. Included in here are all the monitoring reports that are expected throughout the year. And one piece, unlike previous years, I didn't put in a lot of educational programs because our meetings have been so full, it's hard to get those in. But that's one that if there's any direction from the board of any education you want, we can get those in there.
In the past, we've sent you emails on what we think we'd like to have included, right? Not when, but.
Yes. Yeah, I've gotten feedback from the board about topics that the board would like to see, and that's very helpful to get that in there.
Sometimes we suggest individuals, you actually need that.
I would say
Good topic.
any topics that the board would like to
I beg your
hear.
pardon?
Any topics that the board would like to hear, you need to get that to me, whether it's, I always take it if you give me an individual, if I can get them, that's great. Otherwise, I try to get somebody in the same vein.
Right, good.
So if you wanted an economist and I can't get the exact economist you want, find somebody that can do that.
Good.
Yeah.
When do you need that by? Sooner the better.
It's really, I would say, as far as education, this gives you a general sense. I would say that that's something we have the ability to do throughout the year. It's not necessary that you tell me today who you want in November. But it's something we should bring up with the board, and maybe that's something that happens in the meeting. If there's something more that the board would like, or one of our work sessions where we identify that, that's good feedback.
Right. Yeah, and I think this, I mean, that's helpful to not have them set in stone, because I think things emerge as the year goes on that the board needs more information about or wants to learn about. And I think that that allows us some flexibility. My only question on this, Todd, would be that we had talked about doing quarterly board work sessions to kind of discuss bigger issues as we discussed at the last meeting. And I am looking forward to the upcoming work session so that we can kind of have those discussions as a board that fall outside the issues that come before us in the regularly scheduled meetings, because our meetings have been so packed that it doesn't always allow time for some of those bigger discussions. So I don't know whether in a future iteration that we would want to incorporate dates or approximate times for those quarterly board work sessions.
I'm still operating on the direction of setting those up. It's just, quite frankly, you guys are like herding cats to get you all in the same room.
No, I
So-
understand completely.
Gave up on the first one and just focused on one date, and Lori is now starting to work on the second date. So that may be filled in. We're still aiming for quarterly, but I may not have it down, so I can say right now what each one's gonna be.
Right, that's fine, and maybe we could talk about that at the work session. So what works generally for people, because I think it is helpful to have those dates set in advance so that we can kind of plan our schedules around them and have everybody be present. So I appreciate the difficulty of that. Okay,
I think, Anson, we actually can go have lives. It's a lot easier.
yeah, exactly. So I would entertain a motion if someone would like to make one.
I have a question quickly. I
Yeah.
thought I remembered something, but it says the library director remuneration, let's say that wrong. Decided no later than March 31st. And I thought I remembered you saying that could be delayed because of something.
Yes, so usually at the February board meeting is when we have that discussion. And the person that every 2 years, we have an outside person review my performance. And that person who's been doing it for 12 years retired. So we have just contracted with another company, and we're expecting them to have results back to you for the March 9th meeting.
Okay.
And we just kind of finalized that. So expect that discussion to come up at the March 9th meeting. If for some reason they can't meet that deadline, then it's going to be the April meeting. I'll get you out.
Can you tell us what type of review they do? Is it 360 again, or is it something?
Actually, I'm not totally sure what they're doing. I kind of, because it's for my review, I kind of stepped out of that. And left it to HR, so and Jennifer might be able to tell you something if she's still out there.
We'll get there.
And she is no longer on. But she has been checking in with Ann. I don't know, Ann, if you have anything you can add to that discussion, because I know you were working with Jennifer on what that might look like.
Right, I have been meeting with her and talking about alternatives, and evidently the 360 review process that we've used in the past has kind of fallen out of favor for various reasons in the HR community, so it's not used as heavily as it was, but we excuse me. We did get proposals from different companies that incorporate some elements of
Uh-oh.
this process. Was very 360 focused, but this will, I think this will be, it still includes some of those elements. It also includes compensation elements as far as, which was not a part of what Jim did for us. So I think it will be expanded in some areas but it will, it'll be pretty comprehensive.
So we'll be able to get the analysis in the report before we meet. The next one, hopefully, or good.
And I'm sorry, I was so involved on the second one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know that because she's been working hard to research what's out there and who's available to do this work in the time frame that we need it done. And so I haven't talked to her about that, so I do not know whether.
Excuse me? I was just gonna say, we just need to get this done before you finalize the budget.
Yeah.
Right.
Finalize the budget itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why she's been working hard on it. So
For me, it would be helpful if we get the report beforehand with some sort of explanation, so we can try and digest it. I know the first time we did the 360, I sat there and going, what is this thing? But after Jim explained it to us, that's clear, but it took almost 2 meetings.
Yeah.
To fully understand what it said.
And
Right.
Having seen their product, I know some people are hesitant to give things in advance without being able to explain. I know Jim did. He liked to explain it before you saw it, so. but I
Right.
don't know.
Okay.
And I would say, one thing the board should do when we get this is, yes, you should take their information and use that for evaluating my performance, but you should also be thinking about, is this the report that works for us? Because we may want to adjust in the following years,
Right.
rather than just accepting whatever comes.
right. And I had some good discussions with Jennifer about what the board found useful in, like what types, why the 360 format worked for the board and what kinds of information we were trying to get out of it and kind of some of the historical background for that. So I think she came away with a good understanding of what kinds of information the board wants to see. So.
I would say one of the most important parts for me of the report was what we could do to help Todd achieve what he needs to do. Assistance, mentor, coach, whatever, and what specific areas.
Right. And yeah, the coach, I emphasized that aspect of making this report not only useful to the board, but making it really useful to Todd and facilitating that coaching and mentoring work.
That's a board responsibility.
Sure, let's see.
Should we need a motion?
And I think we need a motion on the calendar.
Yeah.
I will move to adopt the calendar as presented.
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Motion adopted. All right. Library news, Todd.
Yeah, one news, as you may recall, in the past, we had a standing agenda item for Collective Impact Bend, which was a meeting with representatives from the Parks and Rec District, the City of Bend, School District, and COIC, Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council. And I think we've kind of come to we've been over 2 years, been trying to figure out what our mission is there. And it kind of come down to, right now, what would be most effective is to actually have a chance for the chair of each board and the director come together in a group and basically have an informational meeting of what each agency is doing, so we have some coordination. Kind of dropped our efforts to try to do some joint efforts on things, just isn't working. Mainly because a lot of times something works for 2 agencies, but not 5. But that allows us that degree of flexibility where we get to know much better what other agencies are doing. And so that's kind of a change that's happening. Probably in May or June, they'll have their first meeting in that vein, so stay tuned for that. We did mention, we are going to move back to printed event guides, so it will be shared in the bulletin, the source, and the nugget. Currently, we've drafted an online version that it's our first step towards getting our toes back in the water. As a staff, we are working on developing a strategic plan, basically for us, how we're going to carry out everything that you want us to do and what it'll look like. And that is something, as we develop that, we'll also be talking with you about how does that tie in with, as we've had discussions before about developing a vision, what's our mission. And so that will be something that we'll be bringing to you at a future date. But the main part of this is to help us set what major tasks we need to accomplish the board's results. We also, as was approved last month, we started working with the executive coaching for equity, diversity, and inclusion. So that's just getting underway. And highlight, we do have a work session coming up, and that's May 7th. And hopefully you all got that in your calendars. We're all set for that. And Margot Helpan will be facilitating.
March 7th.
Did I say
May
March?
7th?
May 7th. March 7th. March 7th.
It's March, right?
It's March.
Right.
You know,
And I wrote down May, so let's take that off. I think, unfortunately, on Groundhog Day, I watched Groundhog Day, and I feel like I've been stuck in that rut since then. So time is really effective.
learning to play piano.
Yeah. There you go. So that's it for library news.
Okay, for foundation news, we had our second of 3 author presentations last week. Tommy Orange presented in conversation with Jason Waters, and it was amazing. It was really insightful. Great conversation, great connection between the 2 presenters, and lots of good questions from the audience. It was really outstanding. The third and final author presentation for the year is Neil Gaiman on March 6th. The time is still being solidified since he travels all over the world, and we're trying to figure out exactly where he's going to be on that day. But yeah, it's been a great year. The foundation is working hard. Work is beginning on the capital gifts campaign. So that effort is underway, and yeah, things are busy.
How many participants were there for the Amy Tan and the Tommy Orange? Or separately?
I don't have that information right off the top of my head, and one of the challenges of doing this on a Zoom format is that ticket sales are down because people are, especially this year, are gathering in groups. So people are having events at their home where they invite a bunch of people coming in and watching it. And so we have no idea of how many people are watching on a single ticket. We knew husbands and wives would probably watch together, or family units, but people are having author parties. And so the ticket sales don't necessarily, well, we know that the ticket sales do not reflect how many people are watching. So I don't have those numbers right in front of me. It's down somewhat. I think people have are experiencing Zoom fatigue. And we're looking forward to getting back and having these authors be able to present in person. However, the upside of it is we've been able to have some authors like Neil Gaiman, who we would not have been able to afford in person present. So there's some trade-offs there.
No, they're gonna piggyback of Portland. Someone's gonna be there the day before, the day after.
Yeah, we look at schedules. I mean, we always have looked at schedules extensively so that we can reduce costs and bring in people that are going to be in the region anyway. So yeah, Chantal does a great job of working with other, the people at Literary Arts and other regional author events. But we have also been able to attract some outstanding talent that other places haven't gotten. So we're regarded as one of the premier author speaker events on the West Coast.
I think Bunny has a question.
Yeah, I know there was some technical difficulties on this last one, people getting in. Has that been resolved, or what was that?
Right. There were some audio issues, but they've got an improved way of handling that, because it was a technical issue between the Zoom and the Eventbrite login, and so they've got an improved way of handling that. And then they've also been giving people that have bought tickets links so that they can view it after the fact. So people have been able to view it. It's unfortunate, but these are difficult events to pull off between ticket sales and then actually structuring the event. So I think
Untitled told me this morning that they're going to be handing out the Zoom address to everybody who's a ticket holder from now on. That's when I couldn't get on, I just emailed Chantal and she said, here's the Zoom connect, try that. It's been, I totally missed ADJOURN. I never could get on.
yeah, and I got that link after the fact, and it was pretty cool actually, because in the chat, individual participants were giving, I mean, the staff was saying, try this, try that, because this time there were audio issues where people couldn't hear, and people were actually, I mean, it was like kind of like a crowdsourced event where people were giving suggestions, and so I think they were able to get most people on, so that they had better audio. But hopefully we're going to be able to go back to live events, and these issues won't continue. So that's all I've got. So meeting review, shall we start at the end, Ray?
Very good. Of course, disappointed that the motion was carried, but I think the rest of it is very good information. Nice to know we've got insurance coverage and hopefully a company that will monitor it all for us. That would be great.
Okay, Bunny?
I thought it was a good meeting. I enjoyed all the information that Craig gave. I don't know who put together the DSIP, whether that was your company but I can't say it was riveting reading, but it was an overview that I really could begin to understand what it was. So I appreciate not so much detail, whereas and hereforth, whatever, but that I could understand it. And lastly, I want to say something for Lori. She just has the patience of Job for herding these cats, and she always has something sweet for us. And so thank you for all your work. I appreciate it. I'll second that.
Yeah. Really. Anne?
Good meeting. Again, I appreciate Robert and Greg, your patience and your clarity in your presentations. It really helps, make sense of all the detail that you guys are presenting to us. And I just want to say I'm looking forward to our work session on March 7th. I think that'll really give us an opportunity to really discuss, which is kind of hard to do in a board situation. So looking forward to March 7th.
Okay, thank you. Cynthia?
I second everything that's been said. I really appreciate your reports also, because I go through them multiple times. So I'm not understanding everything. And then it gives me a better understanding of what you're presenting. So thank you. And also, Lori, thank you. You're amazing.
Okay, well, I concur with what everybody has said. I'm looking forward to the work session, and I really do appreciate the patience of Robert and Greg moving us through a lot of detailed information, allowing us to ask questions, and just the clarity with which the information is presented. I think that the DSIP program is really a great way to go. And I realize the complexity of putting all that together, but I feel like it offers a good level of protection for the district and some real benefits for us. So I appreciate the work that went into that. And I'm also excited that we now will own the land that the Redmond Library sits on. I think that's a big step forward. So kind of a historical move. So those are my comments. Todd?
Oh, I just want to say I really appreciate the meeting. I think I threw out Robert's Rules of Orders a couple of times and I really appreciate, sometimes that seems helpful to move a meeting along, and I appreciate the ability for everybody to do it. And we got a lot done today, so I really appreciate that. Thank you all.
Okay. Well, and thanks for the accommodation of not having me sit next to you. And I also appreciate Lori a lot, and Todd, and all the staff that works to make these meetings possible. So with that, I'll adjourn. Thank you, everybody, and look forward to seeing you at the work session.